What happens to a child when they stop trusting the people around them? Not because they're a bad child, not because anyone meant to hurt them, but because they're afraid of making the wrong choice. I spent many years trying to answer that question, and looking back now, I think it explains a lot about the person I became. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I'm simply an older fellow reflecting on my own life and sharing what I've learned along the way. Maybe you'll recognize a little of your own story in mine. I was abandoned as a baby and spent time in foster care before finally being placed with a wonderful French-Canadian family. They gave me a home. They cared for me. For that, I'll always be grateful. But as a very young child, I had already lived in more than one home before I arrived there. I don't remember those first few years clearly, but I often wonder how much those early experiences shaped me before I was even old enough to understand them. Growing up in foster care meant there were regular visits from child welfare workers. They would ask me if everything was all right, if anyone had hurt me, if I felt safe. At the same time, I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, I'd be moved to another home. So as a child, I felt caught in the middle. Should I tell the truth? Should I stay quiet? What happens if I make the wrong decision? Think about that for a moment. That's a heavy burden for a young child to carry. Like many children growing up in those days, discipline was strict. If I got into trouble at school, I was punished. If I got into trouble at home, I was punished there too. I'm not here to judge how people raised children back then. Times were different. I'm simply sharing how those experiences felt through the eyes of a little boy. Over time, something changed inside me. I stopped trusting people. I kept my feelings to myself. And underneath it all, I carried a lot of anger. Have you ever noticed that anger is often covering something much deeper? Fear, confusion, loneliness. For me, I think it was all three. If these conversations about healing, mindset, and understanding ourselves resonate with you, I'd love to have you join me by subscribing. Every week we explore life lessons that can help us move forward with a little more understanding and a little more hope. As I became an adult, I realized I was still carrying those childhood emotions. I had a quick temper. I found it hard to trust people. When I became a father myself, I wanted to give my children a better life than the one I believed I'd had. I didn't want them growing up with the same fears I carried. But I also discovered something difficult. If we don't understand our own pain, we sometimes pass pieces of it on to the people we love the most. That realization was painful, but it was also the beginning of change. Years later, I finally learned the truth about why I had been abandoned as a baby. The past didn't change, but my understanding did. And when my understanding changed, so did my anger. I finally realized that the little boy inside me had spent years trying to make sense of things he was never meant to carry alone. That realization brought me peace. Not all at once, but little by little. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Our childhood may explain some of our struggles, but it doesn't have to decide the rest of our lives. Healing doesn't begin when the past disappears. It begins when we understand it differently. And sometimes that's enough to change the direction of the rest of your story. Take care of yourself. God bless. And I'll see you in the next video.